The year is 2000, and somewhere in a creative meeting in Salt Lake City, Utah, the development team behind the WCW video game brand, Kodiak Interactive, came up with a novel idea. Hot on the heels of being the first wrestling game to take the fight from the ring to the backstage area, their logical next step was to expand the backstage area. Their contemporary WWF SmackDown had about 5 backstage locations linked together. WCW wanted to do more. The real novel idea was to ditch the ring entirely. A wrestling game with no wrestling ring. Welcome to WCW Backstage Assault. Each and every wrestler in this game looks like a victim of Sid from Toy Story. The wrestlers are supposed to be the selling point, and legitimately, the only way I can tell them apart is from their attire. The rest of the models look like misfits from the island of Dr. Moreau. Not the book. The terrible film with Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando. Usually, this would be a forgivable instance considering the technical limitations of the hardware, but in this instance, you'd be wrong. While their contemporaries at the time were pushing the limits of the hardware, the people behind this atrocity seemed to have their finger jammed firmly up their noses as they were putting the models together. And let's not forget that by default, Scott Steiner has green freaking hair. Thankfully, you can change it, but at a cost. Changing his hair drops him from the main roster to create a wrestler territory. What a wonderful trade-off. But how about the animations? Surely they've got to save the day, right? Well, not exactly. These were the days before motion capturing, so everything had to be done by hand, or seemingly in this case reenacted using legitimate wrestling dolls. A great deal of the moves were dragged kicking and screaming from Mayhem, with a few more added in here and there such as the Stone Cold Stunt... the Chartbuster, and a version of Jeff Jarrett's stroke that looks like it was performed by a person who legitimately has had a stroke. Again, in comparison to their contemporaries, these again are pretty atrocious. The control scheme is pretty much the same as it was back in Mayhem, but with more variety when it comes to actual moves, but in saying that, a few wrestlers seem to have a ton of duplicate moves making this point moot. There are only so many times I can see Sugar Shane Helms do a snap suplex before I want to snap the disc in half. One thing that I'm sure you must be thinking is, since this is a wrestling game, can you do corner moves? What about the ropes? Decent question. Well, the ropes are replaced by the next bounciest thing in the minds of the developers. Car tires. Not a joke. Legitimately car tires. You can either bounce off of them yourself or bounce your opponent off of them for major damage. Would you believe me if I said that the car tires too were the answer to the corners? Because they totally are. When in doubt, car tires. The be-all end-all in this game are the backstage areas. There isn't a great deal of variety when it comes to these areas. You have a parking lot which looks more like a junkyard than anything else. You have a media center, a loading bay, the boiler room, a gym, and some toilets with detachable urinals. You haven't seen anything until you see sweet dear Molly Holly, also known as Mona back in WCW days, damn near kill Vince Russo with a urinal, while Tony Schiavone goes mental and then proclaims the match to be a classic that may never ever be duplicated. Again, I kinda wish I was joking. Legitimately, the only thing about this game that was innovative was the fact that there is a version of the Inferno match type, where the first person to be set on fire loses, for those of you who don't know. But without a ring, how do you set your opponent on fire? Well, it's kinda simple. You Irish whip your opponent into a flaming barrel. Physics. How do they work? Usually I'd be really excited to talk about a creation mode, but I'm not really interested in playing Seth Brundle right now, to the wrestling world at least. Much like WCW Mayhem, there is not a great deal you can do to make your character really stand out or unique. Not like SmackDown 2, which was released around the same time and had a fantastic Create a Wrestler mode. This, much like everything else in the game, is just... why bother? Your character will look just as ugly as the rest of the misfit toys that comprise the roster, but hey, if you want to play Dr. Moreau, be my guest. The only improvement here is the fact that you can actually create your own moveset this time around. In Mayhem, you could only choose a moveset or a finisher, but since both were tied together like a loveless arranged marriage, it's quite useless. This time you have full control. Well, at least they kinda got one thing right. Once again, not quite. Moves had a certain point value to them to keep everything on the up and up. But as is a running theme, they kinda missed the target here, leaving much to be desired. This is reminiscent of the Acclaimed games from Attitude onward, where you have a percentage meter for your moves. Being that there is no arena to speak of, there's no actual career or season mode. Not even a true quest for glory like Mayhem. Instead, the main mode is that you have a series of matches. After each match, you go deeper and deeper into the backstage area, fighting a new opponent, unlocking a new superstar, until you find whichever champion that you've chosen. Now there's 3 champions to choose from: the Hardcore Champion, which is the easiest difficulty mode, US Champion, which is medium, and World Champion, which is hard. But there's no true difficulty to them, to be honest with you. But as well as unlocking superstars, you can also unlock backstage areas such as extra, like bathrooms, stuff like that. But the mode isn't really challenging at all, to be honest with you. It's very, very lackluster, which seems to be the general theme of this game. Lackluster wrestling in what can only be considered an unsafe work environment. But hey, remember that time Booker T defended the WCW World Championship in a bathroom? Using a urinal as a weapon? Good times. Thanks, Vince Russo. Alright, maybe I made that up, but it could have happened. We don't have to dream, because we have this video game, right? Essentially, this game seems to be the brainchild of Vince Russo. Let's get edgy like ECW by ditching the ring and having wrestling matches in wildly unsafe work environments. It plays out like a Russo idea too. Terrible execution all over, while the hacks paid to commentate, well okay, just Tony Schiavone. Lap it up like the cheap whore that he is. And since he is a cheap whore, this is the greatest video game in our sport. The only impressive thing here is the roster of about 57 stars and 1 Vince Russo. But without a solid graphical game to back it up, we have nothing positive to take away here. To say this wrestling game is nothing but trash, it does a disservice to actual trash. While THQ and Ukes were growing their engine in leaps and bounds, and Acclaim were kind of spinning their tires going nowhere fast, somehow WCW's brand got worse from their previous installment, WCW Mayhem. My lasting impression of the game is one key piece of commentary from perennial pain in the ass Tony Schiavone.
I hope no one slips on the urinal cake.
That's the most accurate thing you've ever said, Tony.